On behalf of the Global Home Education Exchange Council, I would like to welcome you to today's session, which is essentially on the subject of human resources. My name is Peter Stock. I'm the chairman of the Outreach Committee of the Global Home Education Council, and I will be moderating our discussion today. This webinar series is a project of GHEX, and it's specifically a project of both our Outreach and Advocacy committees. So myself and Mike Donnelly, who's chair of the Advocacy Committee, are hosting these seminars and moderating them. Our goal for this series is to help you as a leader in your country to create a robust support structure for homeschoolers in your nation. GHX is supported by many organizations and individuals, and we thank all who are part of our network and support our work to advance the freedom of home education. We believe that everyone everywhere should have easy access to home education without undue burdens from their government. As the UN Declaration of Human Rights states in Article 26.3, parents have a prior right to decide what kind of education their children shall receive. We believe that home education is a natural, fundamental, and inalienable human right. To support the global home educating community, GHEX works to connect leaders, support research, and influence policy. We have a network stretching right around the world. To learn more about it, please visit ghex.world. All right, well, we're going to get started here. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing our guests. We have 4 panelists today, and they come to us from around the world, and interestingly, from some of the biggest nations or collections of nations in the world. So there's an interesting hook there as well for folks. We really cover a lot of territory, I think, between the 4 panelists. So I'm going to go around the circle, and but before I do, let me just briefly introduce each panelist. First of all, from the United States and from the Homeschooling Legal Defense Association of that nation, we have the Vice President of Administration, Chuck Hurst. Representing the Alliance Defending Freedom in Europe, we have Senior Counsel Robert Clark, who's coming to us from Vienna, Austria. From Moscow in Russia, and representing the Homeschool Support Center, we have Guzul Gerdes. And in Canada, from right in the middle of the country, just near Winnipeg, Manitoba, we have Gerald Huebner, who not only is chairman of HSLDA in Canada, or the Homeschool Legal Defense Association of Canada, but also currently chairs the Global Home Education Exchange. So great pleasure to have all 4 of you. As I said, rather than giving a lengthy introduction to each of you, I'm going to ask you to tell your own story, and we're going to start with some introductory remarks. I'll start with Chuck, and I'll pass it over to you, Chuck. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm glad to be a part of this. I've been working at HSLDA for 32 years now. And when I first heard about homeschooling was just prior to my coming to HSLDA. My wife and I were both school teachers. We met teaching school. Actually, she was teaching too many classes and told the principal she needed someone to come and help. And when the principal went to look for someone, she told her, bring him back 25 and single. And that was me. So, but when we first heard about homeschooling, we thought it was pretty ridiculous. We were skeptics. We were professional teachers. We thought you should leave this to the professionals. And we changed our minds gradually when we had our own children. And that was sort of our introduction to homeschooling. So I don't know if you want me to stop there, Peter, and just leave it at that, and I come back to some things later.
No, continue on and tell us a little bit about what you do at HSLDA and the human resources process there. This is what we're trying to dig into today, and we'd really like to hear at least a little bit of. Perhaps you could tell us about your coming to HSLDA in particular, and what you do there.
So when I came to HSLDA, we were there was 10 people here at that time. It was a pretty small organization. We had right around 12,000 members. And to put that in context, now we have about 107,000 members. So it's been let's say we've seen a pretty big growth curve over the years, but God's blessed us in a lot of different ways. And when I first came, my role, I always joked about it, was basically to do everything that the attorneys didn't want to do, which I think we had 4 attorneys at the time. And so you can figure it out. If we only had 10 staff people, we weren't a very big organization, and that left me in charge of things that I had no business being in charge of, but like accounting and technology and things that I'm grateful not to be involved in now. But my primary role at HSLDA now is to oversee a lot of the administrative things, and HR was one of those areas that I had to begin focusing on early in my career at HSLDA because we didn't have anyone with any expertise in that area. So figuring out how to build the staff, how to choose people, how to how to communicate your mission to your people, those were real challenges, and they continue to challenge us. But it's something that we continually work at. A couple of things that I thought would be lessons that I've learned over the years, I think that would be good to share, is that one of the biggest things you can do is have a very clear sense of mission and make sure that you tell everyone where they fit into it. Make sure your people know, because even someone in the mailroom can have a real sense of accomplishment and being a part of your mission if they just understand where they fit into it. Someone who cleans the building can have that same sense of mission. But it's up to us as the leaders to communicate it to them in a way that they can understand it. I suppose another big thing, a lesson that I've learned is don't be afraid to ask for advice. When you start off and you don't know, be humble enough to say, I don't know, but be willing to ask people and seek advice, and make sure you're asking the right people and show initiative. And that's one of the things that I would say has been really important for building teams. And I don't know who comes from a faith perspective or not, but for me, I can say one of the biggest lessons I've learned is, there's a verse in scripture that says, man plans his ways, but God orders his steps. And for us, one of the big things we've done is, me and my wife, we'd spent time when there's positions that needed to be filled, just praying, God, bring us the right person. Keep the wrong person away and bring us the right person. So those are some lessons that I think are important to consider when you're looking to build a team.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to move to Europe now, and Robert is in Vienna, I believe. And ADF, just for those who don't know, is an organization that defends freedom, including parental rights. It's not specifically a homeschool organization, but I'll let Robert tell us a little bit more about the ADF story and his place in it, and how he deals specifically with human resources and hiring.
That's a lot of big questions. Well, yeah, thank you, Peter. Maybe just to start with ADF briefly. ADF started in the US and started life just over 25 years ago as the Alliance Defense Fund. And what the Alliance Defense Fund did was act as essentially a grant-making vehicle for lawyers to represent people who found themselves in difficulty because of essentially a desire to live in accordance with what they believed. So parents who wanted to homeschool, or people who wanted to pray with a colleague, as some of those early examples. And of course, time went on, the challenges grew, and the need grew. And there came a time that ADF realized, well, instead of just making grants to lawyers sort of out there to take some of these cases, wouldn't it make sense to bring some of those lawyers in-house and have them working all day, every day on these cases, which might A, save some money and let them do more cases, and B, also let them develop real expertise in these areas. And that's what ADF did, and in time ADF became Alliance Defending Freedom. And then in many ways, I'm part of sort of the the next step in that journey, which was a look beyond the borders of the US to realize that actually as much as ADF's needed in the US, there is a similar and arguably in some places perhaps even a greater need for an organization like ADF, which engages with some of the issues that we see in culture today, but from a legal perspective. And we know that's not the only perspective. We know that we need humanitarian work, we need reform of certain educational provisions, we know that we need parents to be able to play their role and have their rights respected in countries in Europe where it is a criminal offense to homeschool, for example. So there's a real need out there. And so I'm part of ADF International, which is headquartered in Vienna. It's a partner organization of ADF in the US. And so we have a close working relationship. Our CEO is Mike Farris, who founded HSLDA. And so homeschooling it has always been an important issue to us, but I think it's fair to say that's never going to be far from the front of our minds. It's just very much in the DNA of our organization. And we've had some successes. We have had some encouraging stories. There are organizations that have been facilitated. There are parents who have successfully challenged state interference. And we've also had some setbacks. And I think it's important to share that because there are challenges. There are issues that people face. And I think if we just pretend that this is always easy, and if we pretend that everyone has a really straightforward time with it, then I think it discourages those who start taking steps down this path and then encounter some opposition. You feel like, well, should it be this hard? And is it like this for everyone? And the answer is it's not like this for everyone, but it is like this for others. And that's why I think organizations like HSLDA, like GHEX, and hopefully like ADF International, as well as some of the other organizations that I know represented in this webinar and this webinar series, are so important. In essence, I want to support you. I want ADF to be a resource for parents and for organizations that are trying to promote and facilitate homeschooling. And we focus very much on the legal side of things. So if you're interested in guidance with curriculums or guidance with issues relating to pedagogy and so on, ADF's probably not going to be a good port of call for you. But if it's on the legal side, and particularly if it's legal difficulties that a family has run into, or homeschooling group or collective, or even at the more structural level, so homeschooling laws, that's something that we follow very, very closely alongside our allies and our partners around the world. So I don't know, Peter, I'll pause there because I've spoken for a little while. There's lots more I could say, but I know there's others that haven't said nothing yet. So you tell me if you want to hear more from me or if you want to go somewhere else now.
Well, we'll definitely come back to you, Robert. Let's move on to Gazelle in Russia. And Gazelle has been part of something very new there. She's founded a new organization just in the past few years. Gazelle, would you like to tell us about that, what you do, and just how your organization is growing and some of the experiences you've had, please?
Hello, my name is Gazelle Gordas. I'm CEO of Homeschool Support Center and a mother of 5. Some years ago, my husband and I decided we had to homeschool our children. Not an easy decision to make. In Russia, for some 70 plus years, homeschooling was strictly forbidden. 3 generations of Russia were brought up thinking that proper education and socialization can only be achieved in the state-run school. Even nowadays, many parents consider homeschooling as something an irregularity. Few people consider that homeschooling had been around for quite some time. For thousands of years, it was in the family that people got their first training for the life to come. And while the education thus provided wasn't standardized, no one can double it was the parents that should school their children in adult responsibilities. And the children, thus school turned out better prepared for this adult life, ready to interact with their neighbors and colleagues for form strong families. The modern culture is a mate and the separation between generations. Children are in kindergarten or school, parents at work, all people are put in comfortable retirement house. This sort of separation leads to people growing up without experience through heartwarming family relationship. The scope of the inner needs as person shrinks to base self-interested. They grow incapable of loving other human beings, their motherland, their tradition, rootless generation. Homeschooling is natural God creation environment for bringing up and educating children. This is why, as a mother and citizen, I feel important to talk to people about homeschooling. And 2017 has led us to found HSS Center, an organization that support people who choose homeschooling option. 4 years down the line, HCC covered 22 regions of Russia without 8,000 children, as the number doubles annually. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, this separation I spoke about grew only worse. It was was difficult to socialize with our friends and to meet with like-minded people to advocate our values and the values of homeschooling. But yet, strange as it might seem, the same pandemic has served as a catalyst for change in people behaviors. The latest empirical research indicate a change in consumers' behavior. McKinsey, Deloitte, and other companies are regularly carrying our surveys, monitoring people values and ways them influence customer experience. This year, when asked that what things people come to value during the pandemic, the top responses were family, person and family members' health, friends, and religions. And at the bottom of this list, we think like career, work, and colleagues, personal growth. This is why we think that during this pandemic, many parents will be interested in homeschooling. Today panels, I remember, tiled building your team. When it's come to homeschooling, despite Russian legislation being relatively sympathetic towards the form, we still regularly have deal with issues of homeschooling families having to find the right rights. The main areas of concern are lack of legal literacy in region of Russian Federation. In smaller towns across Russia, people wishing to homeschooling their children and still having and navigate certain red blocks. For example, school officials may be unwilling to supply parents with their pupils' records. Our legal team has prepared a package of documents, links, and that educate the parents about their rights and help prepare the necessary papers for switching for homeschooling. We are provided this package free of charge. Thanks to our public education efforts, we no longer have to keep a large team of lawyers, and the amount of requests for legal help us substantially reduced. I should also note that there have no major case of parents' rights being infringed in Russia that would have necessitated legal action. This may be to fact that so far homeschooling in Russia is still relatively rare. The main point of concern remains getting certificates of secondary education. In Russia, to enter a university or college, one needs to provide a certificate of secondary education and unified state exam certificate, like SAT, Russian SAT. A child can only sit for USC and get the necessary certificate at state certificates center that is, of course, in school. This for case of all homeschooled high schoolers to enroll in school. However, since such pupils are not content as full-time students, and the school received no state funds to convert their education. This make homeschoolers burden most schools try to get rid of, forcing them to revert to full-time schooling. Realizing the scope of this problem, our company developed its own IT platform for preparing and testing homeschooling pupils that we provide to school free of charge. Thus, we enable school to test such pupils without upsetting the school regime or placing extra burden on the teaching staff. By the way, schools found our platform equally useful for those of the full-time student that would like to study from home. In 2021, had around 800 of such students were also actively supporting these parents of such homeschool children, advertising them of subject like best practice, socialization, and different. And this third point, GR, despite Russians, the favorite legislative climate from homeschooling officials regularly voice the desire to future regulate the homeschooling scene. We and also the lawyers from the National Association from Family Education are actively opposing such developments. Thanks to joint efforts of lawyers, bloggers, and parents from across Russia, we have successfully toward numbers of such laws began being passed. This is subject that calls for cooperation, not only among homeschooling parents, but also people practicing alternative education programs. We need to always keep in touch. This is why we are doing a lot of streaming program on social network to discuss these issues for help our family get cooperation and know each other better. We also are convinced that it's vital for us to take part in expert panels in local and international conference so that we would share our practical experience and speak of new research into homeschooling. For example, our company is a member of Pedagogical Universities Association, chaired by the Russian Ministry of Education. Also, in the 5 years, we co-directing the Moscow Education Salon, the largest education event in Russia. And concluded my talk, I would like to say that in this difficult time, what is vital is the ability to connect and to cooperate, not confrontation, that to join effort and dialogue between state and the parent community. We hope that Russia will continue to be a country. It will be possible to rise and educate a decent generation with a background of traditional values, and that homeschooling will once again became the traditional form of education as it was in the previous century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guzel. That's wonderful. I'm going to turn now to Gerald Huebner. Gerald chairs HSLDA Canada, as I mentioned earlier, and HSLDA Canada is 30 years old this year, so it's somewhat similar to HSLDA USA. It's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of history there. And Gerald has been on the board of HSLDA Canada for much of its history. So Gerald, if you could tell us a little bit about your story with HSLDA, maybe with homeschooling as well on a personal level, and also how you've seen HSLDA Canada grow over the years.
Thanks, Peter, and it's great to be part of this this panel of friends and partners from around the world. Our family, my wife Bev and I, started homeschooling in 1989, a long time ago, with our 2 children. We home educated both of them all the way through their school years, and our story, I think, was similar to many in that we started because of a particular challenge with some educational challenges with our son, and we saw that home education was something that might offer some solutions for us as a family. We thought we'd try it for a year, and we did, and we tried it for another year, and then went all the way through. It was something that we experienced the joy that Gazelle you talked about, the that family closeness, those things that go beyond the textbooks, and the learning that we just so much appreciated in our lives. And a large part of what we've been doing since then is just wanting to share that joy and wanting to see others continue. I've said many times that I was pretty convinced that we would be able to homeschool through our children's homeschool years and be able to do that without huge challenges. But I was not at all confident on whether it would happen in such a way that my grandchildren and my great grandchildren would be able to have that same freedom and that same choice to be able to freely choose to educate their children. And so my reason for continuing to be involved is really that it's that generational legacy to be able to be able to pass this on. We now have 4 grandchildren that our daughter is home educating, and it's exciting to see that our role has changed. At the time when we started homeschooling, we didn't know about we didn't know other homeschool families because there really were very few of them. There was no conference to get together and see things in our province. We got involved in leadership in our province, in large part to try to get some of those things started, and we remain involved today and connected today. We were involved in discussions in the early 1990s, and as Peter said, HSLDA Canada started 30 years ago this year, and we were at that point saying, could we do something on a national basis in terms of a legal organization? And HSLDA Canada was formed in 1991. That's 30 years ago, and you know, sort of the thought would be we've solved all the problems. Not nearly. We regularly sort of get the comment from homeschoolers in various provinces who say, well, why do we need this? You know, the government is nice. They're sort of taking care of us and looking, you know, we're able to do this. Why do we need a legal advocacy organization? And I would say that there's a distinction between legality and ease or practicality. There's a lot of times when something may be legal, but not very possible. There's a lot of times when something is technically legal and you can do it, but it's very difficult to navigate. And the things that are being thrown up and put in place make it challenging and difficult. So our organization certainly looked at legality, and it was not technically legal in all parts of Canada when HSLDA Canada started. It is now. But it isn't, even to this day, it's not always easy or practical or something that is consistent. So we are really in place to support that advancement of homeschooling to make it possible everywhere for everyone. When we look at organizations, and we particularly look at the organization of HSLDA US, it's a big organization with many staff and now over 100,000 members. Canada is much smaller. We have less than 10,000 members in Canada, but I think we're getting by. But it's you know, even an organization like HSLDA Canada to many countries looks like a big complex organization. But we started small. We started with one part-time person that was working for us, and I would just encourage you not to be overwhelmed by the big organizations and the things that are being done in other places, because virtually all of them started small. We look at big conferences that are organized in the United States for massive crowds of 5,000 and 10,000 people. I suspect that if it's like anywhere, those conferences started with probably 5 or 10 or 20 people and grew from there. And I think don't be afraid to start small and do what you can, because it does make a difference. The need is there. The need is there for an organization. My role has been not in the administration or the legal aspects in HSLDA Canada. I'm on the board and have been for many years. Our role as a board is really governance and setting the high level direction. We choose the leadership of the organization, and our role is largely one of the vision, and our job, I think, in large part, is to be the cheerleader for the CEO and for the organization, to be able to encourage them to do the great things that they can do. One of the things that I've learned is that it's more than the staff of the organization. It's more than the paid people that work directly for the legal organization. We depend in a huge way in the grassroots. In Canada, we don't have a national Department of Education. We have provincial responsibilities that are constitutional in education. So each province has its own responsibility. And there's two things we've learned. One is that a national organization is powerful and important, but local voices and local information and local efforts are crucial, because there's a lot of times when a local organization is if HSLDA or national lawyer calls, they get their backs up. They get somewhat intimidated many times by that kind of level. But if a parent, and particularly a homeschool mom, contacts them with some reasonable requests, it has an impact. Something that a politician shared with me a number of years ago that's stuck in my mind. They said that nothing stirs fear in the heart of a politician more than the wrath of a mother. And I think that a lot of people don't necessarily realize the power and the strength of the voice of people that are out there and directly impacted. They're people that are impacted by this because it's their family, but they're also impacted by this and have impacts because they are voters. They vote in the people that they're talking to, and that's very important in terms of having a voice, because the politicians don't necessarily hear from a lot of normal affected people. They hear from a lot of lobbyists and a lot of organizations, but it's important. And a big part of what we do is equipping, encouraging, and building those leaders and those parents throughout Canada, which is a big country. And we think that that's really the backbone of much of what we do. Yes, we have staff. HSLDA Canada now has, I'll let Peter fill in the numbers better because he's the president, but we have about 6 full-time staff and probably 20 or so contractors and part-time staff. We're not huge, but I think with the team that we have, it's been very effective. So Peter, I'll stop there, and we'll fill in the gaps on other things as we go along.
Thank you, Gerald. Let's start to drill down now a little bit into the details of hiring and contracts and how we decide to hire and those sorts of things. We'll go in the reverse order this time, but yeah, let me ask that question, which is, how do you've got certain, let's say, professional needs that need to be filled in an organization as it grows, and some of these have been mentioned already. Certainly, everybody's mentioned lawyers. Sometimes lobbying needs to be done. Do you hire a professional lobbyist? Accounting and bookkeeping and some of those financial services, and maybe there are some other services, just frankly, somebody to answer the telephone. How do you decide how to hire for these things? Where do you look for these staff? Do you hire full-time, part-time? Do you look for contractors? What do you find works best, and how has that developed over time? Gerald, maybe you've touched on this already, but maybe you could drill down just a little further for us, and we'll go in the reverse order.
Well, just a little bit about our story. HSLDA Canada did not have a full-time CEO or a full-time lawyer for the first 15 years of its existence. Really, I think that we have had a lawyer as the CEO or the president of HSLDA Canada up until 5 years ago, Peter. And it was something that we wanted that legal expertise, but we also wanted to make sure that we were balanced and were covering the bases. I think a key for us has been to have people who are passionate about the cause. And Chuck, your comment of making sure that that cause is well understood, well defined, and well presented is so important. What we've found as an organization is that we have been able to hire people that are not just looking for a job. Certainly, people need to live and need to have a career and those things. But to find people that have the commitment to carry the mission and the passion, and we found that is the essential part of what we're looking for in our staff group, and whether that be at the highest level or whether it be lower in the organization, to have people that understand it. Now, many of the people that our organization have either homeschooled or been homeschooled, so have that personal connection and information. I don't think that's an essential part. We don't say that you have to be homeschooled or be a homeschooler in order to work for us, but it does help in understanding the culture, because there is a culture that pervades this alternate form of education and the things that surround it. I think that we've looked at our various elements and said that there's parts of the organization that we can hire expertise like lawyers. There's other parts that we need to have dedicated within the organization and our staffing. And the present CEO, Peter Stock, who's chairing our session here today, came into the organization because he had vast experience in the area of legislative lobbying internally in government, and we was able to bring a focus in being able to help us develop the strategies, particularly in supporting the provincial organizations in their development of legislative focuses. So we don't have an HR department. We have a pretty lean organization, but I think the focus on mission and purpose and the development of a coordinated team that uses the expertise on a flexible basis of the staff has been really a key.
Thanks, Gerald. Okay, Guzel, what would you like to say about the issues we've just raised?
In our center, there are 20 people in our center. Most of it works to support the IT platform which help for parents and just bridge between school and the parents. And some of volunteers are our mother who are ready to help our parents with experience and practice and different questions. Also, we have private chats on the social networks are very helpful for solving many issues. And we involve lawyers for part-time job, because no question about legal, not legal question.
Thank you, Guzel. Robert, your organization has a specific focus, and so where do you look for staff, for lawyers, for other professional help? Do you hire in-house all the time? Do you contract it out? How does it work for you?
Yeah, no, I was scribbling some notes down as people were talking, because it's a good question, and maybe I'll just share a few sentences on where I come from, because I think I've not been involved in the same way perhaps as others on this call in building up an organization, or also even specifically a homeschool association or homeschool legal defense organization of some description. But I did join a very small organization. People think of ADF and they think of ADF in the US, which is huge, and that's what I think when I look at ADF and colleagues in the US. But what I joined was a single office in Europe. I joined 7 years ago, and at that point I was part of a team of 4, which I'm not suggesting is small, as others have said. There are organizations that exist, and that there are clients of mine that I work with who have a board, a volunteer board, and that's it. There are no employed staff members. So I'm not suggesting that 4 is small, but I think when people think of ADF, often they think of something very different from 4 people in one office covering a continent. And that's what I joined. And then over the last 7 years, it's been a bit of an adventure and a bit of a journey to really see that grow and be part of that growth. And I've been involved in setting up teams across Europe. So in Brussels, Strasbourg, Geneva, and London, in addition to Vienna. And so 7 years on, we have more offices in Europe than we had people when I joined. And so it's an incredible thing to think of in terms of how we've been blessed in that way. But I think at the practical level, that there are definitely some lessons that I can perhaps draw from that might apply whether you're in a position of having nothing formed, or perhaps having a volunteer board formed, but thinking, how do I hire, who do I hire, when do I hire? And I think one thing that I would say is develop your network and develop your friends and develop your relationships before you need them. And ADF, alliance is in our DNA. The A of ADF stands for alliance, and interestingly, even through that name change that I said, and right into the present with ADF International, that A has actually always stayed the same. The other parts of the name have shifted a little bit, but the A did and does stand for alliance. And I think that's sort of a grandiose way of saying friends, or partners in the work. And I think something that I've seen time and time again is how important it is to have those relationships. And if the first time you seek to develop a relationship is the point at which you need someone to do something for you, or to provide help, or to respond quickly, you might get lucky. That person might be really gracious, or you might catch them at the right moment. But you're much more likely to get lucky if you've developed a relationship with that person before you ever needed anything. And I think when it comes to kind of bringing people on board, whether that's asking them to join a board in a voluntary capacity, or asking them to join as a staff member in a part-time role, one of the things that I see, and I think it's a direct extension of that principle, is almost everyone that has been hired onto that team that's grown in Europe over the last 7 years is someone who was already known to the organization. Now, we put adverts out there. You can find postings on the website. You can find jobs posted on Indeed.com and all these places. And we get applications, lots of applications from those places. And occasionally, someone applies through one of those kind of portals. We've never come across them before. I ask around and said, no, I've never heard of them. And they go through an interview process, and it turns out that they're a great fit, and they end up getting hired into that position. But that's like, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would estimate that's like a 1 in 50 type statistic. I would say 99 out of 100 or 49 out of 50 maybe are people who are connected to us in some way already. And I think that's not an accident. That's because we've sought people out. We've tried to develop relationships with those who are interested in this from different perspectives, whether they're policymakers, whether they're homeschooling parents, whether they're local decision makers, whether they're lawyers who either have been involved in these kinds of cases, or maybe they haven't yet, but they're interested in the issue. So, there's a good contact to build. So I think that's what I'd say. And there's lots more, but I'd say build your network and build those relationships before you need them. And then when it comes to trying to assemble a team in some form, that's the network you want to build from. So if you're hoping to build an organization, then the first step is not building the organization, it's actually building the network that precedes it.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Great advice. Chuck, let me turn to you. You've heard the question a couple of times. What are your thoughts?
Would you ask the question one more time?
Sure. Just in terms of hiring, whether you're hiring full-time lawyers, whether you contract that work out, maybe do a combination, lobbyists, other professional help, and where do you look for talent?
So things have changed a lot, as I mentioned. We started off with 10 people, and now when we count our part-time people, we're at about 140 staff members. So, and we're in this position now where we almost always have at least one position open. I like what Robert says, build your alliances and have contacts, and that's so very important. We have the wonderful benefit of being on the same campus with a college that caters to a lot of homeschooling students. who many of them end up working here. So it's almost like we have this built-in recruiting opportunity right here in front of us. That has not always been the case, and that's not always going to supply us with the right people for the positions that we have open. So we've tried to be very intentional about making our interview process very transparent, who we're looking for. We want someone who shares our values, someone who has a passion for homeschooling. Of course, not everyone that we hire has homeschooling in their background, and that's not necessary. We just want someone who shares a heart for freedom, has a heart for supporting families, at least is open to homeschooling and thinks it can be a great asset for families. But it's really fascinating to see how God has brought people to us over the years. We, as I mentioned, we do pray for our positions to be filled with the right people, because we have a staff prayer meeting every 2 times a week, and that's a common thing that we do lift up and ask people to pray for. We have used recruiters to help us fill very technical positions. We ask our people to refer people to us, friends of theirs that they think will fit into our culture. That's probably been one of the primary ways that we fill their positions, is just tell your friends. In fact, when we first open a position, we send a notice to our staff and we tell them, do you know someone that you would recommend that would be a good fit for this position? And they know someone who is either going to be a good fit or not. I would say take the time to get it right, because it's a lot harder to get rid of someone, it seems, than it is to just do it right up front. But once someone seems ensconced in your team, it's a more painful process to encourage them, that maybe there's something else that they should be doing because it's just not a right fit. So sometimes that's our fault, that we haven't figured out what the right personality is or what the right skill set is. So it's really important to do your homework up front, have a thorough job description, have full disclosure, tell these people, here's what the job's going to be like on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I think we struggle with as we've gotten bigger is onboarding people in a way that they feel like they understand the whole organization. So I've heard people tell us, and this is the number one criticism that we get from our own staff, is centers around communication, not allowing people to understand what other departments are doing, what their projects are and their priorities, and how other people in the organization fit into that. It's an ongoing challenge. So that's one of the things we are working on, is having a better process for helping people understand the whole organization, where they fit into it. So taking some time, the bigger you get, taking some time to make sure that you don't just throw someone into their job, but you go ahead and let them understand the scope of the organization, what they're doing, how they fit in, will allow them to feel a part of the organization, and they'll probably stay longer. Replacing people is one of the most expensive things you can do as an organization. They say it's, you spend 6 months of someone's salary looking to fill a position if if the person, a really qualified person, leaves. So that's part of what we're also working to do, because I don't know what the rest of the world is experiencing, but inflation in the United States is going a little bit crazy right now. We had almost a 1% gain in the rate of inflation in the month of October. It was 0.9%. And the last 12 months, it's 6.2%. So we as an organization are thinking about, well, what can we do to keep our people, to make them feel valued and keeping up with inflation and staying here and being a part of our organization when they have other places that they could go and make more money. So that's something that we're also considering, is how can we help our families, our staff and their families feel valued in their work at HSLDA. So that's some of the challenges we're facing as a larger organization. And I say larger compared to some, we're very small, but in the homeschooling world, we're a pretty big organization. So if I were to wrap all that up, I would say, be careful about putting people on your team that share your values, who will stick with you through thick and thin, and make sure that they feel valued. I think that's one of the challenges that we face and that we're continuing to work at.
Thank you, Chuck. Just a note to those who are watching online with us live, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. You can ask them at any time, and we'll try to get to asking as many of them as we can as the seminar goes on. I'm going to go in the reverse order again, starting with Chuck. And so the question this time is not so much about paid staff, but about volunteers. Do you use them? Or have you used them in the past? How do you use them? What are some of the pitfalls of using a volunteer versus an employee? And how do you treat them? If you treat them differently, how do you treat them? Maybe you could comment on volunteerism.
Sure. I actually am very excited about expanding our use of volunteers. Just here in the United States, we have thousands of moms who are finishing homeschooling, who have a passion for what they've done. And they've invested their lives in their kids. And now they're like, oh, what do I do? How can I stay involved? I have a passion for this. And we've been talking about how we can actually do that more. We're looking at perhaps a mentoring program, giving the moms opportunities to serve as volunteers. But understanding there's got to be a training process, and they have to feel comfortable in doing that, and they have to represent your organization properly. So it's something that you have to be careful about. But I think it's a great opportunity. We currently use volunteers when we put on conferences. Let me restate that. When we go to conferences, it's expensive to travel and bring people to conferences, homeschool conferences. So now over half of the conferences that we HSLDA attend, we buy a booth, we have a volunteer working the table. But we have a little training program that they go through. They understand about HSLDA. We give them a free membership, and we pay for some of their expenses, for travel. And it's a great way to keep people engaged. We also have an ambassadors program through our Compassion program that helps families who are struggling through hard times financially. We actually we're trying to get an ambassador in every state who can be sort of boots on the ground and find out, well, what's going on with this family? What really happened? How can they really be helped by the homeschooling community? So that's a great way to use volunteers as well. But we do have a vetting process for all of our volunteers. Through our Generation Joshua program, they have parents who volunteer and go on action teams, to try and get out the vote and different things. So we do it. I'd love to do it more, but the thing that organizations have to keep in mind is you've got to give them something to work with. You've got to train them. You've got to tell them what the expectations are and help them feel valued, communicate with them. We're looking to do more of it. We have been doing it, and I think it's a great way when an organization can't pay for staff or they struggle to do that, is to figure out a way to engage people who share your passion for what you're doing.
Thank you, Chuck. Robert, I'm not sure if ADF is able to use volunteers, whether that works within your organizational system, but do you have any comments on that topic?
Yeah, I think in some ways, ADF is sort of built on volunteers in the sense that we, that alliance that I spoke about, that there's an alliance in a perhaps broader informal sense, and that's to say that there are many people that we work with day to day, but there's perhaps a narrower, more tightly defined alliance, and that's to say those that have gone through some of our training programs and have said, yes, I want to identify myself as a member of this alliance. I want to be available to work on these cases. So these are the 3,200 lawyers around the world who've been through one of those programs who say, yeah, I want to make myself available. And many of them are volunteers or act as volunteers. We have a grants program that's kind of our genesis, as I shared earlier, and we continue to make grants to lawyers who take cases on behalf of clients who couldn't afford to pay, or whether such wider principles at stake in a case that there's a real importance in having it resolved, and hopefully resolved favorably. But there are many of those lawyers, many of whom have become friends, and I think there's probably another point in that as well. But there are many of those lawyers who don't apply for a grant for those cases, and who don't charge a client. They do it pro bono, and in that sense, they're volunteers as well. And so I think there's, that's one thing I want to say on this call, and it's, perhaps information for those on the call, in the sense that we have this alliance of lawyers who are willing to work in this area, often at no cost, or at least at no cost to their client, through the grants program. And so I have huge appreciation for those. But I think the other thing that I've seen with volunteers, perhaps in a broader sense, is the hardest part, I think, is not necessarily finding them, but I think trying to think really intentionally about giving them something to do. Because I think, we all probably feel like we have too much to do. And if you read any book on, founders of early startups or early organizations, I have too much to do. I was answering the phone, and I was trying to fundraise, but I was also trying to do kind of the program work. And then I was also dealing with this fire and putting this out. We all always have too much to do. It's, I think, probably something to say about the human condition. And volunteers can help with that. But I think we often don't do the next stage, which is to figure out, okay, well, what can they do, and what do they need to be able to do it? And I really like the example that I think, Chuck, you shared with, in terms of, well, here's something they can do, and they're going to need a little bit of training to be able to do it that's proportionate and reasonable. In that way, they can be invested in the mission. We get a touch point with someone, they're likely to become more supportive and closer to us as an organization through doing it, and we get their help in sharing that with other people. So I think that's a really nice example of taking this. We've got too much to do. There are people who are willing to help us, and then actually joining those together in the middle with, and here's something that really that they can do. Because I think it's the number one question I get asked when I speak at events, when I go and speak to churches, when I speak to lawyers, young lawyers, law students. How can I help? How can I help? And if I'm perfectly honest, depending on the audience, I'm not sure ADF always has the best answer. Now, I'm a lawyer, I can come up with answers, and they're not necessarily all bad. Yes, you can pray for us. If you're a Christian, if you're a believer, you can pray for us. That's good. You can find out more, go online, you can sign up for our newsletter, you can donate, and all of those things are good. I don't, if anyone ever responds to me saying those things by doing any one of those four things, that's wonderful, that's good. But I think this is a step beyond that. And I think that's where it just takes a little bit of work, but by us at the front end, to figure out, okay, this is the group, this is their availability in terms of time, this is their capacity in terms of skill set and where they come from. People are not all going to be able to do the same sorts of things. And this is the need that they can meet. And I think it's that step, and it depends kind of what stage you're at and the context you're in, what the answer might be. But finding that point where people's willingness and your need meet, that I think is the sort of the magic bullet in this context.
Thank you, Robert. Guzel, when you founded Homeschool Support Center, did you rely on volunteers? Do you still rely on them? How do you find them? What do you use them for? How does that work for you? How do volunteers help your organization?
Yes, volunteers are our parents. This is about 300, 500 active parents from different cities. We have created chats on social networks, and they help and navigate through legal and organization issues. At conference or meetings, parents and children help in the organization, and parents from different cities also help us to hold regular meetings in different cities, place or some equipment also. Some parent lawyers who helped put together a package for parents who want to transfer to homeschooling. For our center, very important only to create platform for this dialogue, and for this communication. We're just thinking, where is it better? It can be meeting, or it can be some special chat for example, social networks, or it can be meetings on some city or downtown. It's depend, but yeah, we work with volunteers very, very close.
All right, thank you, Guzel. And Gerald, what's your experience with volunteers over the years?
Well, volunteers are the backbone of the organization, and they're also the challenge of organizations. And I think a significant key to it all is relationship and communication, and it's a constant effort. When do we work with volunteers? Do we work with partners? Do we work with which one are they? Are they a partner? Are they a volunteer? They're all of those things, and their role is so key. A big part of what we've done over the years is really developing relationships, attending conferences, being able to, yes, to speak at a conference is great, but to be able to sit down over coffee and to talk about how are you doing? How are the challenges that are being faced locally, and how can we help with those? The events are great. We try to do some on a smaller scale, but some similar things in using local people to be our representatives at events and to promote HSLDA as an organization. Those are key, but in order for them to do that, they need to be convinced. They need to be committed. They need to be given the materials to be able to charge forward and say, yeah, I think this group, this thing, this organization, in our case, HSLDA Canada, is worth their friends and neighbors considering parting with their hard-earned money. And it takes that endorsement, it takes that support. The challenge we have is that we have a large country, many. It's similar challenge to what Guzel faces in Russia, just a vast nation with many families being quite isolated in their journeys. But it's important. One of the steps that we took was to organize a national conference. We started in 2001 with a national conference, sort of modeled after what was done in the United States. I've done on a smaller scale, but it was a very large key in building our partner, our network, our volunteer base of people, and giving them, at least on an annual basis, some things, a shot in the arm and some information, and feeling like they were part of a bigger team. And I think that identification of being part of a bigger team, it's more than just your family. It's more than just your homeschool. It's a bigger cause. And casting that bigger cause is one that is not so easy. It's one that takes a bit of time for people to be able to step outside of their personal situation and realize that what's happening in another province that's a long way away from us, or even in another country, but particularly in another province, does affect them, and they need to be part of that. And a big part of our organization is it's not all about them. It's about the larger issue all across our countries, and being able to build that larger vision. So building volunteers, I think, is sharing the vision. It's communicating the vision. It's being able to have people feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and then feel like they're making a difference, and recognizing clearly what's their part in that. And it's an ongoing challenge, but I think that's the strength and the future and the opportunity that we can build on as being, for at least for Canada. That's where our opportunities lie.
Thank you, Gerald. Well, you certainly led into an area that I'm going to ask about next of everyone, and that's the question of geography. Because as Gerald pointed out, Canada, Russia, the United States, when we consider the East Coast right to Alaska, Hawaii, and Europe, where we've got more than one time zone as well, from the Azores right to let's say the Baltic countries, huge areas. And how do you serve people in such a big area? Could you maybe speak a little bit to staffing issues and volunteer? How do you manage to serve families in so many places? Gerald, you've touched on this a bit. Do you have staff in more than one province or more than one state? Or more than one country? Robert mentioned more than one office earlier. How does that work? How does that work for your organization? And let's remember, we're talking about the biggest countries in the world here today on our call. There are smaller countries, but almost every country has more than one city. Almost every country has some distance to it. What should folks who are starting national organizations be thinking about when it comes to the question of geography and serving people across a large area? Gerald, could I start with you, please?
A great question, Peter. And the thought that comes to my mind is first of all that the strategy should not rely on serving out of one place. It's a matter of how can we serve, how can we build, how can we network that's not geographically dependent. We struggled here in Canada where I remember us agonizing about moving an office from one province to another province. We used to be based out of a province in Western Canada. Now we're based in well, it depends on your viewpoint. We'll say Central Canada. And, I would say, number one, it doesn't matter. For us, we don't need to be, from a national point of view, we don't need to be in our capital, because we don't have a national Department of Education that we would have to lobby or do things with. Our work needs to be all across the country. Do we need to have staff in different places? I think we need to have connections in different places. The staff locations, I think, in the last number of years has become less important. To have a base of operations, yes, there's some merit in that. But we can be very diverse, but we need to be connected. And HSLDA Canada does have staff in 3 provinces, and it does have benefits. We can do it strategically to take on and to be able to cover some things, but we don't try to cover the country with staff. We try to get the best people that we can, and if they happen to be located in a place that has some advantages, that's beneficial. And I think technology has improved so much in being able to connect and to work virtually that it's made a huge difference. But even technology depends on relationships. We can use Zoom a lot, and we can do a lot of things by Zoom, but we still need to have a relationship, and that takes time. And I think it takes more time with technology, but it certainly is achievable.
All right, thank you, Gerald. Gazelle, Russia is the biggest country in the world, no question about it. How do you deal with the challenges of the geography of Russia?
Yes, the geography, it's very, very big. 82 regions of Russia work with our center. Our center employs from different cities. They work on the distance. Most of them are parents who have contact us, and therefore found out about us and came to start to work with us. We also invite people through recruiting agency. For example, it can be lawyers or IT specialists. Also, we used IT platforms to find employees. We have in Russia different platforms which can help you to find some special expert or some specialists. It's not a problem. Also in our center work 20 people in different city. All from the house. It's my politic that all employee must be with children, with family, and I prefer to work with people who practice homeschooling.
Great, thank you. Robert, you mentioned earlier you have a number of offices and staff that perhaps move around a little bit, I'm not sure, but how does your organization work? How do you serve such not just a vast area, but quite a diverse area in terms of language as well? How does that work for you?
Yeah, not so much moving around anymore, but let's stay away from there for now. I think there is a yeah, I mean, I look to the US sometimes with envy. That's not to say there aren't, of course, important differences between the states in culture to some extent, certainly in law or state law, but to have one common language, and yet in Europe we're faced with 50 odd countries and essentially as many languages. And that is a real challenge. And it's one of the reasons that we have tried to scale to the size that we are, to be able to build effective relationships with people. You can't just speak English and expect to have relationships with people across Europe. You can't just speak German and expect to have relationships. And I mean, to give a Russian example, until a few years ago, we had almost no relationships with lawyers in Russia. We had almost no allied lawyers in Russia. We had almost no political or parliamentary contacts in Russia. And we said that the only way that we're realistically going to be able to address this is if we try and hire a Russian speaker to our team. And so we set about doing so, and we managed to find a German Russian speaker, speaks a few different languages. And he was a great fit for the team. He came on board, and almost naturally over time, we started to develop relationships in Russia. You can see our friends smiling along. It's it's been wonderful to see, but that's just straight up a language issue. If we hadn't hired Felix and then his colleague Lydia, we probably wouldn't have some of those relationships in Russia, and I think we all know that's true to some extent. So that's an issue that we deal with. But I think to try and sort of draw some principles from that, because I think ADF is in a particular place. We try and impact the international institutions of law and governance, the United Nations, the European Court of Human Rights, the European Union, and so on. These are huge amplifying voices in the world, right? If they say something good, they have there's an amplification effect that then kind of moves out. It's given the stamp of international institutional authority, and frankly, if you're in a large, powerful country, you have some margin as a state to ignore that. If you're in a smaller, less powerful country, you have far less margin to ignore what some of these institutions and bodies are saying. And I'm afraid to say these bodies aren't always saying very good things when it comes to parental rights or when it comes to education. And so we try and interact with those bodies. We try and encourage them to do good things. We try and stop them from doing bad things, in essence. And that's at the international level. But I know that most people here are not working in that way. They're active at a national level, which actually on this issue is probably more important. And so we're active at a national level too, but the work looks very different. So whereas our team interacts directly with those institutions at the international level, when it comes to bills that are pending before legislatures nationally or cases that are going up through the courts nationally, we are almost always working on those things alongside a local organization or a lawyer in that country, for I mean, a variety of very logical reasons. Sometimes it's language, sometimes it's actually being admitted to practice in the country in question, sometimes it's local knowledge, and sometimes it's just the ability to be able to navigate a system that's different from perhaps the ones that I'm familiar with. And so if I kind of try and draw something from that, I think the big thing I would say is know who the decision maker is. And that will impact how you approach it. So for us at the international institutional level, the decision makers are MEPs in Brussels or in Strasbourg. They are bureaucrats in the European Commission, and they are diplomats at the United Nations sent by 190 odd states from around the world, receiving their instructions from capital level. So if you want to impact that, then you have to go to those decision makers, and that's something we try and do. But if you're trying to impact policy when it comes to education, home education in particular, at a national level, then first off, figure out, is it a national level or is it a regional level? Because many countries do devolve that to a state or Bundesländer level. And then I think it's figuring out what you then need. So is it, as I think Peter said at the outset, is it lobbyists or is it lawyers, or is it actually just voices or authentic voices of people who say, this is an issue that concerns me, here's why, and this is what I'm asking you to do, and equipping and empowering people to be able to do it. So I think know who your decision maker is. Who are you trying to impact? You know, making noise and protesting or writing letters to the wrong person probably won't do much good. And the decision maker isn't always the person that you see on the TV or whose name is on the letter or whatever it might be. It takes something sometimes to go behind that and figure out who's in control, who's driving this, who's making the decision, and then finding a way to them. And that might be someone in your city, it might be someone in another city, or occasionally it might be someone in some kind of international institution. But I think more often than not, it's a far more local thing than perhaps we're initially led to believe.
Thank you, Robert. Chuck, you have a large organization for homeschool organization. You serve a lot of families, as you've told us. How do you serve those families? Are your staff all in one place, or do you have folks right across the United States? How does it work for you?
So we have one center of operations, and that's in Virginia. For those of you who are familiar with U.S. history or U.S. geography, that's kind of on the far east side of the country, but then there's a lot of country that's to the west of us. And the way we've been able to serve families who are not in our time zone, I mean, we have primarily 4 time zones that we serve, with the addition of Alaska and Hawaii, but is we've taken the country and divided it by states, and we took our staff and we divided them by states as well. And so we have attorneys that have certain states, and then we have legal assistants that work with them that have certain states, and then we have customer service people in our membership department that handle certain states. So they don't have to be experts in everything. They just need to know how to explain what the rules are for homeschooling in those states and how it can work. So yes, Robert, we do have one language, although people from south to north don't think they speak the same language sometimes. But education is controlled by the states here in the United States. So each state has a different take on homeschooling. So it does take people having a certain level of understanding, a deeper level for some of those states in order to give good advice to people and just let them know what forms they need to fill out, how we can serve them. One of the things that, Robert, you mentioned a relationship. I think Gerald, we did too, and that was, as well as Giselle. That's a big thing for us, is to build relationships across the states, and our attorneys do that primarily. They try and understand who the leaders are, and even though we may be thousands of miles away from them, we still hear their heartbeat. We know what they desire. We go to conferences in states where we don't really get a whole lot out of it ourselves, but we do a lot of it for the relationship because we want to help those state organizations. We want to encourage them. So we travel, we send people, all the way to California to numerous conferences. And that's a way to maintain that relationship. So we don't have to be there. We did talk about it. We have talked about it over the years. Should we have offices West Coast and East Coast? And, the way technology is making it possible to communicate, it's become easier, actually. I don't think, we haven't talked about that in a long time because I just don't think it's necessary to maintain the types of relationships that we need. One other thing we've done is, Gerald mentioned that they do a national conference. What we've tried to do is move ours around the country, so no part of the country feels like they are being neglected. So we've been everywhere from, New Mexico to Williamsburg, Virginia. We rotated around in a way that we tries to show deference to different parts of the country. So those are ways that we've worked to handle the widespread geographical area that we deal with.
Hey, thank you, Chuck. Well, I have a question here that's come in from somebody in South Africa, and the question is this. And I'll just throw it open to the panel. Whoever would like to like to try and answer it, please go ahead. The question is this: since litigation is few and far between, and this is in this individual's country, especially in countries where conflict situations are not frequent, when does it make sense to have a staff attorney? And I suppose the difference being maybe just contract out the legal work or the lobbying work, et cetera. So maybe another way to ask that question is, when did you find it necessary to start hiring the full-time staff, full-time lawyers and so on, as opposed to just hiring a lawyer to take on an individual case? Is there a key time that happens for organizations? Chuck, let me go back to you to start with.
Okay, sure. Well, we've always had an attorney here because it was founded by an attorney. But nevertheless, the person's question about litigation being not real prevalent. The interesting thing for us is that our contacts and the things that could become litigation have increased over the years, and we have more threats of things that could turn into legal problems than we've ever had. Even though there are laws, there's many different interpretations of those laws and how they get enforced and what school superintendents think that law says. So for us, I think we've needed legal advice from the very beginning because challenges to freedom don't seem to go away. And so for us, it's been an ongoing thing. We've hired more legal staff, and we do have a fairly consistent number of cases, that make it into litigation. But compared to our contacts, it's small. But we still need that. We still need that legal expertise.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else want to answer that question? Gerald, I see your hand up there.
A couple of comments. I think first of all, we started with a staff person that was a lawyer. He wasn't full time, but was a lawyer, and I think that's been important. It's been important because the legal advocacy has been the foundational, not the only, not always the most important, but a foundational service that HSLDA Canada has been able to offer. And I say foundational because I believe it's something that people will pay and support in a significant way, more so than some other services, because it's unique, it's specialized, and it's not available through anything else. And I think that's been an important thing for us. The other aspect of it is that having real focused legal expertise in the organization is difficult unless you actually employ someone on at least a part-time basis that allows them to do more than just a bit of work, but allows them to develop their expertise. And I think, you know, our challenge is finding lawyers who really have in-depth expertise in home education legal issues, because it is a very specialized area, and most legal practitioners would say, I really don't know a lot about this. You know, I understand the general principles. The warning I would have is that the legal aspect is one tool. And it's a tool that we have to be careful that we're not just using a hammer because we have a hammer. We need to be lobbying when we can lobby. We need to be negotiating when we can negotiate. We need to be doing all of the things, and legal litigation is only one aspect. And we always have to be careful that we're not just using the one tool that we happen to have in our pouch, but developing all of them. And you know, legal litigation is only one of the aspects of it. But having that expertise now, you know, you can get access to some of that on an international basis that can help you grow things. But those would be my comments.
Thanks, Gerald. Robert or Guzel, did you want to add anything to that question at all?
Robert?
Well, I mean, just I was just going to pick up on something that Gerald said. To a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and to a lawyer, every problem looks like an opportunity to sue someone. And you know, I think there are countries which are known to be more litigious. There are countries which are less litigious, and certainly the UK is probably a few steps removed from the US, but by European standards would still be considered litigious. But if you move outside of the UK into kind of more continental Europe, you'll find much less litigious societies. And there are advantages to that, and there are disadvantages to that. But I would just say a lawyer can bring an awful lot that's not just kind of filing cases. There's obviously the opportunity to analyze legislation, to speak into that legislative process, perhaps bring some weight to a dialogue with local authorities. I'm not saying that someone else couldn't do that, but it may be that an organization is taken more seriously if they're represented in some sense. But I don't think it's essential. And one thing that I will say, and I know it might be odd that I'm saying this as a lawyer on this call, but I think actually in many homeschooling disputes that I've seen, they shouldn't really be allowed to reach a litigation stage. But sometimes, because of stubbornness on one or both sides, and because of perhaps an unwillingness to compromise on one or both sides, you end up with a situation where actually a not very important principle is ending up being litigated on not very good facts in a not very good forum, and results in a not very good precedent. And that wastes a lot of people's time and money and energy. Litigation is exhausting for most people. And so that's just a caution that I would attach. So I think lawyers are good. I think lawyers can do more than just litigate cases, but I also think there is a significant need for caution when it comes to figuring out, well, which of these disputes is ripe for litigation. And the fact that someone has a disagreement with the authorities does not mean therefore a case should be filed. That there are a lot more questions that realistically, if we have an interest in the success of homeschooling in general, that we want to ask before we just jump to, okay, great, then we should be filing a case, or we should find a lawyer. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Robert. And Guzel, I think you had a comment as well.
Yes, I should also note that there have been no major case of parents' rights being infringed in Russia that would have necessitated legal action. That's why we don't have a lawyer on the staff, only part-time. through history, and also we can answer if parents want to choose family education. We make consultation with lawyers if they need, but it's only part-time job. It's not on the staff full-time employer.
Okay, thank you, Guzel. Well, I'm gonna move to our final question of the day for each of our panelists, and it's this: as you look back over your time with your organization, are there things that you would have done differently in this area of human resources? Experiences you had, you said we could have done that better, or we should have done it a different way. Are there any words of wisdom you can share with us in that regard? And also, would you like to give a final word of encouragement to those who see this video? Maybe I could start with Chuck, and we'll move through the order that way.
Well, things I would have done differently. I imagine we all have some of those. This may sound a little, I don't want it to be discouraging, but just realistic. The thing that I would probably do differently in some cases is don't hang on to a problem longer than you really should, because if you get someone in a wrong position, doing the wrong thing in the wrong way, they discourage everyone else in your team. And it's like it's one of those demotivator things that happens that kind of takes the team just down, and attitudes suffer, and performance suffers, and people get discouraged. And I've done it a few times where I've tried to work with someone and I really knew it just wasn't going to work out. There've been some times where it has worked out though, but I would say talk to the rest of your staff, make sure that you understand kind of what's happening underneath, because if you're at the top, sometimes you don't hear what's really happening. So I would say listen carefully to your staff, and if it's time to let someone go, do it in a way that's very gracious, and understanding that there's probably another place where they're going to be a perfect fit. So you're not harming them by letting them go somewhere else. Just you're helping direct them to the right place sometimes. So I've had to adopt that attitude and understand that that is true. So that would be, I don't think most of you are in a place where you feel like you have to have that, where you'll have that issue, but it happens. It does happen. And as far as a word of encouragement, I would say, don't try and do it all yourself. There are people who are willing to help and be willing to relinquish control of things that maybe, you feel like it's your baby and you started it, and I don't want to let someone else have that authority, but if you're going to let the organization grow, let your team grow, you've got to give them something that's meaningful, where they have authority and they have, you've trained them well. Let's look at them like your children, not treat them like children, but in a sense of you've brought them up and you've trained them, trust your instincts of what you've done, and give them things to do that are meaningful, and let them use your gifts. And sort of as a corollary, I would add, don't hire people like you. You want people who have different gifts. You have your weaknesses, you have your blind spots. We all do. Hire someone who maybe is a little bit different, who has different gifts, different strengths, so that you can give them the things that you're not necessarily really good at. I think that's a very important part of building a team. And if I had understood that better some years ago, I probably would have been just a little bit better off.
Thank you, Chuck. All right, Robert, same question for you. Are there things you might have done differently over the years, and would you like to offer a word of encouragement to our audience?
I didn't know that we were going to close with confession. Yeah, I mean, I think something, and it's very similar to what Chuck shared. I think, when it comes to working with others on a team or with volunteers, or any of those kind of working relationships, I think something that I had to learn was delegating or holding people responsible for outcomes rather than tasks. And I think it's the idea that I'm a very process-oriented person. I could show you lists and planners and checklists, and that's how my mind works. And I'm well aware that there are strengths to it, and I'm well aware there are weaknesses and there are issues. And one of the weaknesses that comes to that is an expectation that, or even sometimes a frustration, when other people don't work in that way, when people aren't as structured. And I think there have been times that I've worked as part of a team or with volunteers, with allied lawyers or others, and tried to sort of bend them to my way, for want of a better word, expect that they would work in the same way that I do. And I think actually, when you have good people, as we've talked about so much on this session, when you have people who are aligned, whose hearts are pointing the same way, then I think actually that's a foundation that you can put a lot of trust in. And maybe they have their own processes, maybe they have their own way of working, sometimes even different ways in communicating that. There are going to be outer limits, but I think most often it's not people pushing up against the outer limits, it's just people doing things differently. And I think as long as you have agreement on those outcomes, then kind of the middle of the story can look very different to what you expected. And maybe is even something you can learn from. So I think learning to manage and learning to hold people to account for outcomes rather than for tasks is something that I've learned and I'm still learning. And then I think an encouragement. I mean, one is this, and this has to be the longest call that I've been on in the last 18 months in which COVID hasn't been mentioned. And I don't want to, be the person who breaks this seemingly unwritten rule, but I'm going to briefly. And my encouragement is this, that I think actually, if you read any of those business magazines and articles, what they're talking about is that COVID has accelerated or catalyzed or brought about a change in some of our working patterns. And they talk about increased home working and people working remotely and from the countryside or from anywhere, talk about increased reliance on tools like Zoom and so on. And I think, we all see this in different areas of life. But I think one of the areas that we perhaps haven't fully plumbed and perhaps don't read as much about is what does that mean when it comes to education? And I think the picture's a little bit less clear because there's a governmental control element at stake in it too, and so there's some kind of identity questions wrapped up in it. But the German government, who as you know is one of the most restrictive in Europe when it comes to homeschooling. Homeschooling remains essentially a criminal offence in a number of German states. Yet the German government sent kids home to be homeschooled during parts of the last year. And I think there's an opportunity in there for us to be able to just challenge some of the narratives that are out there in the role of parents and the value of families and the place of family in the state. And the pandemic, as much devastation and tragedy as it has wrought in so many different areas, I think there is, at least in this, an opportunity to point to a better picture than the one that we often get told and the one that we often see in the media. So that's my encouragement, that I think there's an opportunity for us in this. And I think also my hope is to see, in the same way that we're seeing changes in working patterns, potentially changes in patterns when it comes to understanding of parental rights and just the value that those around us, society, and hopefully also those in power place on families, on parents, and their role in their prior role when it comes to educating and raising kids. So thank you for everything that those who joined and everything that those on the panel have shared, which I've really appreciated. And thanks, Peter, for hosting us through it.
Thank you, Robert. Guzel, things, now I know HSSC is a relatively new organization, but are there things that you've learned even in the last few years? Things you might have done differently if you were starting over? And also, is there a word of encouragement you'd like to share with our audience?
I'm perfectionist. I always want to develop everything and be better. And from my own experience, it's very important to support our employees more often, because I always thought about it last. And for our listeners, I know that family is the best school of our children. And I would like to see homeschooling in Russia again become a traditional form of education as it was in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Guzel. Gerald, things that might have been done differently at HSLDA Canada over the years, and you get the final word of encouragement today.
Well, we're sitting at an interesting point in history. Homeschooling has been growing and developing, and we've heard of the organizations that have been instrumental in that, particularly HSLDA in the United States. And yet we sit at a place where the world has changed in the last 2 years in ways beyond what we can imagine. The numbers of homeschoolers have grown exponentially. And it's almost a place where we start again. So the question, Peter, I think is actually a very appropriate one. In looking at the numbers of families now that are involved, that have massive questions, that have far-reaching implications, governments that I think are now saying, well, we need to do something about this thing. And I think it's almost starting again. And what would we do differently? I think to go back to some of the points that Chuck started with, remembering the purpose. Just remembering that this is not about a product or a service. This is about enabling families to do something that is bigger than them and to make a difference in their family and around the world. So focus on that purpose. And in doing that, to listen more, to hear what families are saying, to hear what our leaders are saying. And probably if there's a challenge that I would say that I would change or I would redo, it's to focus even more on the relationships, on building the relationships that are strong, that will carry us through this, whether it's this pandemic or whether it's other things that are coming, but to do those things. I think if there's something else that I would want to make sure is that we're dealing with issues sooner. The challenge we have is that generally everybody knows about the issue in depth before it's actually sort of officially dealt with. Everybody, it's talked about more so, and to deal with those things is important. And probably if there's another point that I would have in looking at the world that we're in today, is that simply is to seek out and to encourage diversity in both the talents and the approach of the team. A team is not a team if you got 10 players that are all playing the same position. They're all playing the same strategy. You need different approaches. You need to be able to function as a team, and that takes differences. Not everyone's going to think like I do, or anybody else in the organization. We need very different approaches, whether it be a legal, whether it be a lobbying, whether it be a communication approach, whether it be a marketing and an entrepreneurial approach. All of those are needed and to be celebrated and to be built upon by the team. So a team needs to trust each other, and that takes listening and relationship. And so what would I do differently? Just, sometimes we need to just bring around us people that are not like us in order to accomplish things that I could never accomplish.
All right, thank you, Gerald. And that brings to a conclusion this panel. I want to thank each of our panelists, Gerald, Guzel, Robert, and Chuck. Thank you for joining us today. And if you are watching this video and have more questions that weren't answered today, please get in touch with us at ghex.world. Go to the website and you'll find contact information there. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.